few months ago, you may remember we did a series of lessons on the 12 apostles on Sunday evenings. And some of those lessons were pretty easy to develop. When we think about the apostles, Peter, James, John, they pop up a lot in the scriptures. And so when you're trying to figure out what to say about them, it was pretty easy. You could have done multiple lessons. But there were some that were a little harder. You guys may not remember fondly the sermons about Bartholomew and Simon and Thaddeus. And it's hard to take one sentence of the Bible and make a 30-minute sermon out of it. And so we had to be a bit speculative. We tapped into some historical knowledge, and we tried to tie them into some other things as well. But the last apostle that we discussed, because you'll remember we talked about the 12, and then we tacked on Matthias and then Paul. And Paul was himself at one time as a apostle out of due time. I think it's the term that we read there. But I want us to think for a second about those 12 apostles. Those 12 apostles that were traveling and going here and there after Jesus had been gone. It's unrealistic to think that they would have been by themselves. It's not a practical thought that they would have went one by themselves in all these places. The nature of the world would not have allowed it, but also the nature of the job wouldn't really have allowed it either. And so they went to different places, and there's debate and speculation as to where they went. And unfortunately, for a lot of them, we don't really have a ton of information. But we do have quite a bit of information about the one born out of due time, and that was Paul. And I'm taking this because I'm mentioning this because I want to talk about the fact that Paul had some people that was. There were several people that Paul writes about. So if you go into your Bible, starting in Romans, and you go all the way through the end of Paul's epistles, you'll see that in almost every one, he starts with a type of greeting. And he makes mention usually of a person or two or three in that greeting. Quite often at the end of the epistle, Paul will write again that I'm sending this letter with so-and-so, or so-and-so who we met previously was there. Some names that you may see if you look into this are Aristarchus and Barnabas, right? A couple of names that are there. We don't know much about them, but they were people who were tightly connected to the Apostle Paul in some way. You'll see about Epaphras and Gaius. I'm guessing most of you don't know anything about them, but they were people that Paul felt worthy of mention that were on his trip. We read about Tychicus and Onesimus, and if you know anything about Onesimus, it's basically the topic of the book of Philemon, but I'm guessing y'all don't know a whole lot about that because I don't know a whole lot about it either, right? But there are people that were mentioned. I think Paul sends Onesimus back, if I'm not mistaken. And then you also read about John Mark, and Luke, and Timothy, names that may be a bit more familiar to you. But the one we're going to talk about tonight is a character that we see on the board here on the screen, the name of Silas. And often when you hear the name Silas, it's mentioned as the second in a pair of names. Paul and Silas, right? Paul and Silas. Very rarely do we hear Silas mentioned all by himself. Jefferson Airplane had a song called Good Shepherd, right? There's one for Paul and one for Silas. And they both give, even in a contemporary or at least some semi-contemporary modern music, they're still paired together right there. Who was Silas? Well, he's traditionally assumed to be Silvanus, who is also mentioned. It's typically believed to be the same thing. A lot of times with these names, you get the Greek name and you get the Hebrew name, and they operated under both. But he's typically mentioned there, and he's mentioned in 4 different epistles written by Paul, or at least I should say 4 different epistles. And while he's often overshadowed, he actually goes on Paul's first and second missionary journey with him. We've talked about this before, but most of you probably have in the back of your Bible a map showing the missionary journeys that Paul went on. And the first one is fairly short. The second one is longer, and then there's a third one and a fourth one that they go on as well. Silas is on board on those trips. And so if you're tracing that colored line on the map, you'll probably be tracing not only Paul's route, but Silas's route as well. But I think what we're going to hope to see tonight is how that Silas is what we've written on here, or what we've typed up here, a steady companion in the gospel. I think we'll see that he was faithful, that he was courageous, and that he was enduring in what he did as well. Let's talk first about being a faithful servant of the church. In Acts chapter 15, Silas is introduced as one of the leading men among the brethren in Jerusalem, and he is chosen to accompany Paul on this journey. And I know that when we think about this missionary journey, we have to think about it in a sense that we might be taking a journey as well. Dad told me several months ago about him and Mom's planned trip out to the West Coast. And then a few weeks later, he told me, well, I've reserved all of our hotel rooms at each stop. And he told me